Marcus Chen wiped his sweaty palms on his standard-issue diplomatic uniform for the 5th time that morning. Being the youngest human intern at the Galactic Council was nerve-wracking enough, but today the Great Hall was packed with representatives from over 300 species. The massive chamber, with its towering crystal walls and floating platforms, made him feel smaller than usual. He was supposed to just observe today's session. That's what his supervisor had said. Simple observation duty. So why was High King Zixthor of the Chronaxian Empire staring directly at him? The Chronaxian king stood nearly 12 feet tall, his iridescent scales shifting colors under the chamber's lights. 4 arms crossed over his armored chest as he pointed one of his clawed fingers at Marcus. "You, human intern Marcus Chen, step forward." The king's voice boomed through the chamber. Marcus looked behind him, hoping there might be another Marcus Chen. There wasn't. With shaking legs, he walked to the center platform. The anti-gravity field hummed beneath his feet as he rose to the king's level. "Your species is known for taking care of young ones, yes?" the king asked. Yes, Your Majesty. Humans are quite good with children," Marcus replied, trying to remember his diplomatic training. Never show fear to a Chronaxian. They can smell it. Too late for that. Excellent. Then it is decided. I hereby grant you guardianship of Princess Valera. The chamber erupted in chaos. The jellyfish-like Medusans bobbed up and down in their water tanks, their transparent bodies flashing with colors of amusement. The rock-skinned Petroxians rumbled with their version of laughter, causing small tremors in the chamber. "Your Majesty," Marcus squeaked, then cleared his throat. "There must be some mistake. I'm just an intern." "There is no mistake." The king's inner eyelids blinked. "My daughter is different. She shows emotions. She asks questions. The royal tutors have failed to correct these defects." A small figure stepped out from behind the king's throne. Princess Valera barely reached her father's waist, her scales a soft pearl color that shifted to pink when she noticed everyone staring. Unlike the other Chronaxians who kept their faces carefully blank, her large eyes showed clear curiosity as she looked at Marcus. The council members weren't even trying to hide their amusement now. A human raising a Chronaxian. It was unheard of. Ambassador Orcs of the Silicon Collective was actually leaking lubricant fluid from laughing so hard. "If you refuse," the king continued, "it will be considered a grave insult to the Chronaxian Empire. A potential cause for diplomatic tensions." Marcus's mind raced. Earth was just starting to establish itself in galactic politics. Refusing could set human diplomatic relations back by decades, but accepting would make him the biggest joke in the galaxy. He looked at Valera again. She was trying to maintain the famous Chronaxian stern expression, but her scales kept shifting colors with each new laugh from the council members. Pink, blue, gray, pink again. Each color revealed the emotion she was trying so hard to hide. "I accept," Marcus heard himself say. The laughter stopped. "You understand this is a binding agreement under galactic law." The king pressed. "You will be responsible for her education, her well-being, her integration into society." Marcus straightened his back. Maybe he was about to become the galaxy's biggest joke, but he'd seen how the princess flinched at each laugh. No kid should feel ashamed of having feelings. "I understand, Your Majesty. I accept the responsibility." "Very well." The king turned away, his dismissal clear. "Her belongings will be sent to your residence. The princess's condition has proven resistant to traditional Chronaxian methods. Perhaps human inefficiency will succeed where our precision has failed." As Marcus led Valera off the platform, he heard the whispers start. Bets were already being placed on how quickly he would fail. But when the princess looked up at him and her scales shifted to a warm gold color, a shade he'd never seen on a Chronaxian before, he had a feeling this joke might have an unexpected punchline. Marcus's small apartment had never felt more inadequate than when the royal moving crew arrived. They materialized in his living room through a transport beam, carrying crystalline storage units filled with Valera's possessions. "This dwelling is..." Valera paused, her scales shifting to a polite pale blue. "Cozy?" Marcus watched as she took in his cramped living space, the worn couch, the small kitchen, and the view of other apartment buildings through his window. It was a far cry from the crystal spires of the Carnaxian palace. "It's not much," he admitted, "but it's home. Your room is this way." He led her to the spare bedroom he'd hastily cleaned out. The princess stood in the doorway, her head tilted in confusion. "Where is the gravity adjuster, the atmospheric processor, the sonic cleansing chamber?" "We have regular gravity, normal Earth air, and a bathroom with a shower down the hall." Valera's scales flickered between gray and orange, confusion mixed with what Marcus was learning might be anxiety. She pulled out a device from her ceremonial robes. "Then I shall prepare my evening meal according to royal protocol." Before Marcus could stop her, she pressed a button. A bright purple beam shot out, meant to molecularly reconstruct food into proper Carnaxian royal portions. Instead, it hit his microwave and bounced off, ricocheting around the kitchen. They both ducked as the beam turned his toaster into a small fountain of sparks. "I apologize." Valera's scales turned deep red with embarrassment. "In the palace, all surfaces are beam calibrated." Marcus couldn't help but laugh as he checked the smoking toaster. "Well, I guess we're ordering pizza for dinner." "Pizza?" Her scales rippled with curiosity. "Is this a traditional human diplomatic meal?" "It's better than diplomatic meals. It's fun food." Valera's face became carefully blank. Fun is inefficient. The royal tutors were very clear about this. Marcus ordered the pizza anyway. When it arrived, he had to show Valera how to eat with her hands instead of using the formal Carnaxian dining tools she'd brought. Each one looked more like a surgical instrument than cutlery. "But the crumbs," she protested. "They fall in a chaotic pattern. There's no order to this consumption method." "That's kind of the point," Marcus said, demonstrating by taking a big bite. "Sometimes the mess is part of the fun." Valera stared at her slice for a long moment. Then, with scales shifting between nervous yellow and excited pink, she took a tiny bite. Her eyes widened. "The flavor combinations are illogical, yet somehow..." She took another bite, larger this time. "How do humans create such things without following the standard taste protocols? We just try stuff out, mix things up, see what works." As if to prove his point, his phone buzzed. Another diplomatic mission had canceled their meeting with Earth's representatives. The message was polite but clear. No one wanted to deal with the human who was playing house with a Carnaxian princess. Valera must have noticed his expression change. Her scales dulled to a sympathetic gray. "I am causing you professional difficulty," she stated. "Perhaps if I tried harder to suppress my emotional responses." "No," Marcus interrupted. "Look, I know I'm probably doing everything wrong by Carnaxian standards. But where I come from, feeling things isn't wrong. It's what makes us human." "And what am I?" Valera asked quietly, her scales swirling with colors he couldn't quite interpret. "I am clearly an inadequate Carnaxian." Marcus watched as she tried to eat another bite of pizza while still attempting to maintain perfect royal posture. Despite her best efforts, a string of cheese dangled from her mouth, completely ruining the dignified effect. "I think," he said, fighting back a smile, "you're just someone trying to figure things out. And maybe that's okay." Valera's scales settled into a new color, a warm copper tone he hadn't seen before. She didn't say anything else, but she did take another bite of pizza. This time, she didn't even try to catch the falling crumbs. 2 weeks had passed since Valera came to live with Marcus, and he was running out of ideas. The princess tried to follow Earth customs, but her royal training kept getting in the way. She'd alphabetized his entire kitchen, sorted his socks by molecular density, and spent hours practicing her neutral facial expression in the bathroom mirror. Then came the morning he found her staring at his old violin case. "What is this storage unit?" she asked, her scales flickering with curiosity. "It emits strange vibrations." Marcus opened the case, pulling out the violin he hadn't played since college. "It's a musical instrument. Humans use it to make music." "Ah, like our ceremonial war hymns." Valera's scales darkened. "Those are mathematically perfect sounds designed to intimidate enemies." "Not exactly." Marcus tucked the violin under his chin and drew the bow across the strings, playing a simple melody his mother had taught him. Valera froze. Her scales began to shift rapidly through colors he'd never seen before, deep purples, shimmering silvers, and blues that seemed to glow from within. Her 4 ear frills extended fully, something Cranaxians usually only did in battle. "The vibrations," she whispered. "There. She reached out, her clawed hand hovering over the violin's body. Marcus handed it to her carefully. "Cranaxians have enhanced hearing, right? Try it." Valera held the violin as if it might explode, which, given their previous kitchen incident, wasn't an unreasonable fear. But when she drew the bow across the strings, something extraordinary happened. The note she produced wasn't just a sound. It was pure emotion translated into music. Cranaxian hearing could pick up frequencies humans couldn't, and Valera's defective emotional sensitivity let her use those frequencies in ways no one had imagined possible. Her scales were creating patterns now, swirling like the aurora borealis. This is not mathematically perfect at all. It's better. For the next few hours, Marcus taught her basic violin techniques. Valera absorbed everything instantly, her natural Cranaxian precision combining with her unique emotional understanding. But instead of playing traditional pieces, she began creating something new. She wove Cranaxian war hymns into Earth classical music, using frequencies that bridged both species' hearing ranges. The result was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. Beautiful, alien, and somehow deeply moving. "We have to show others," he said when she finally lowered the bow. "This is incredible." Valera's scales dulled to gray. "The council already laughs at us. This is not proper Cranaxian behavior." Maybe it's time they stopped laughing and started listening. It took 3 days to convince her, but finally, Valera agreed to perform at the next council session. As they stood outside the great hall, her scales were almost white with fear. "Remember," Marcus said, "you're not doing this for them. You're doing it for the music." Valera stepped onto the central platform, violin in hand. The council members began their usual snickering. Even her father, watching from his royal platform, wore his typical expression of disapproval. Then she began to play. The laughter stopped instantly. Her music filled the chamber, bouncing off the crystal walls and resonating at frequencies that touched each species differently. The Medusans swayed in their tanks, their bodies glowing in harmony. The Patroxians hummed along at subsonic frequencies. Even the Silicon Collective representatives adjusted their audio sensors to better capture the sound. Marcus watched as ambassadors who normally spent sessions arguing about trade routes and border disputes sat in perfect silence. Several of them were showing signs of emotion, something many had claimed their species was incapable of. When Valera finished, no one laughed. The first sound was a single tear hitting the floor, from a species that hadn't cried in 10,000 years. High King Zixthor stood, all 4 arms held stiffly at his sides. His scales had shifted to a color Marcus had never seen on a Cranaxian before. News of Valera's performance spread quickly through the galaxy. Marcus found himself turning away interview requests from alien news networks, while his apartment building had to install extra security to handle the growing crowd of curious onlookers. "Your morning nutrition cube, Marcus," Valera said, placing a perfectly square breakfast on his plate. Her scales were a calm blue today. She always felt better following routines. And today's death threats from the Cranaxian nobles. They're alphabetized. Marcus nearly choked on his cube. Death threats? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Oh, they've been arriving since my performance. Valera's scales flickered briefly to orange. It's quite normal in Cranaxian politics, though usually they're more creative. These ones just keep calling me the emotional embarrassment over and over. Before Marcus could respond, his security scanner beeped. A sleek hovership was approaching his window, definitely not authorized. Valera's scales instantly shifted to alert red. Down, she shouted, tackling Marcus just as the window exploded inward. A dart embedded itself in his chair, right where his head had been. Valera moved with inherited Cranaxian warrior reflexes, pulling Marcus behind the couch. Assassination attempt number 3, she noted calmly. They're getting better at timing. Number 3. Marcus peeked over the couch as security drones chased the hovership away. There were others. The poison in your coffee last week. The explosive package that I detected and disposed of. I handled them. Her scales shifted to an apologetic purple. I didn't want to worry you. You humans feel so much, all the time. It's both your strength and your weakness. Marcus stared at the broken window, then at the princess who had just saved his life. She wasn't just the emotional misfit anymore. She was moving and thinking like a warrior queen. Valera, he said slowly, I think it's time you told me what's really going on. Her scales darkened to a deep indigo. I've been feeling things from others, all species, not just Cranaxians. During my performance, it became stronger. I didn't just play the music. I felt what everyone in the room felt. The nobles aren't really angry about my emotions. They're afraid. Afraid of what? Of change. Valera's scales swirled with complex patterns. Cranaxians suppressed emotions because they were too powerful, too dangerous for our species. We could feel so deeply that it led to wars, to destruction. But I can feel everything, and I can control it. I can understand it. And that terrifies them. Marcus brushed glass shards off his couch. So your defect is actually a gift, a rare genetic variation that appears once every few generations. The ability to not just feel emotions, but to understand and translate them across species. She looked down at her hands. Father must have known. That's why he chose you. Humans embrace their emotions instead of fearing them. A heavy knock at the door made them both jump. When Marcus checked the security feed, he saw Ambassador Orcs of the Silicon Collective. Let them in, Valera said. They're not here to harm us. I can feel their curiosity, concern. The robot ambassador entered, servos whirring. Your performance has caused quite a stir, Princess Valera. Several species have reported unusual emotional responses. Some are calling it a security risk. Others, the ambassador's optical sensors adjusted. Others are calling it a miracle. And what do you think? Marcus asked. We think, Zorx's mechanical voice softened, that for the first time in recorded history, a Silicon Collective member experienced what organic species called joy during your performance. We find this disturbing and fascinating. Valera's scales shifted to a color Marcus had never seen before, a kind of shimmering rainbow effect. Then perhaps emotions aren't a weakness to be feared. Perhaps they're a bridge to be built. Another explosion rocked the building. Valera sighed, her scales returning to alert red. After we survive assassination, attempt number 4, of course. Marcus's apartment was no longer safe, so the Galactic Council moved them to a secure diplomatic residence. The new place had everything: energy shields, security drones, and windows that actually stopped assassins. But Valera seemed more interested in the grand piano in the living room. Another musical instrument? She asked, her scales shimmering with excitement as she ran her clawed fingers over the keys. Before she could start playing, Marcus's communication panel lit up. The Medusans and Petroxians were at war again, arguing over mining rights in the spiral arm. Both sides demanded Valera's presence at the emergency council session. They've been fighting for 3 centuries, Marcus said as they hurried to the council chamber. "Why do they want you there?" Valera's scales shifted to a thoughtful green. "Because they felt something during my performance. Something they haven't felt in a long time. Hope." The council chamber was chaos when they arrived. The Medusan ambassador's tank was boiling with anger, while the Petroxian representative was literally cracking the floor with his stomping. "This is suicide," Marcus whispered. "These species have tried to kill each other for hundreds of years." But Valera stepped onto the central platform, her scales calm and steady. Instead of speaking, she pulled out her violin, the one Marcus had given her. "Representatives," she said quietly, "before you continue threatening war, would you allow me to play?" The music started softly. Marcus watched in amazement as Valera wove together Medusan tide songs and Petroxian earth rhythms, creating something entirely new. But she wasn't just playing. She was channeling their emotions, their fears, their anger. "The Medusans," she said while playing, "fear the Petroxians will drain their oceans for mineral wealth. The Petroxians fear the Medusans will flood their crystal caves." Her scales began to pulse with each species' colors. But what neither realizes is that they fear the same thing, the loss of their homes. The chamber fell silent except for her music. Through the melody, centuries of misunderstanding began to dissolve. The Medusan ambassador's tank stopped boiling. The Petroxians' aggressive stance softened. "Perhaps," the Medusan ambassador bubbled, "we could discuss a joint mining operation, one that respects both our environments." With proper safety protocols, the Petroxian rumbled in agreement. Marcus couldn't believe what he was seeing. Valera had done in 10 minutes what professional negotiators couldn't do in 300 years. Word spread quickly. Soon, other species were requesting Valera's help with their own conflicts. She mediated trade disputes between the Silicon Collective and organic races, helped the High Clouds understand the ground dwellers' needs, and even got the notoriously hostile Void Walkers to attend their first peaceful negotiation. "You're becoming quite the diplomat," Marcus said one evening as they reviewed their growing list of successful mediations. "I'm just translating feelings into something everyone can understand." Valera replied, her scales showing a new color, a mix of human confidence and Cranaxian precision. "Like you taught me with music." Their success didn't go unnoticed. The same council members who had laughed at them now sought their advice. Even Ambassador Orcs had become a regular visitor, fascinated by Valera's ability to help machines understand organic emotions. But not everyone was happy. The conservative Cranaxian nobles were spreading rumors that Valera was using mind control, that she was a threat to the natural order. "They're planning something," Valera said, her scales darkening with worry as she read the latest reports from home. "I can feel their determination, their fear of change, even from here." Marcus put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever they're planning, we'll face it together. You've shown the galaxy that understanding emotions isn't weakness. It's the strongest form of diplomacy we have." Valera's scales shifted to that warm gold color she only showed around Marcus. "You know what's funny? They all thought a human raising a Cranaxian princess was a joke." She smiled. "Something Cranaxians never did. But maybe the real joke is that it took a human to help me become a better Cranaxian than any of them." The communication panel flashed red, interrupting their moment. High King Zixthor was calling, and from the urgency signal, whatever he had to say couldn't wait. High King Zixthor's hologram flickered in Marcus's living room, all four of his arms moving in agitation. Valera's scales paled as she felt her father's emotions from across the galaxy. "The nobles have made their move," the king said without greeting. "They claim I am mentally compromised by human influence. They say I must step down, or there will be civil war." "Father," Valera started, but the king raised a hand. "There is more. They have arranged a marriage for you, daughter, to Lord Caxnor, leader of the traditionalist faction. Once married, you will be placed in emotional suppression therapy." Marcus stepped forward. "They can't do that." Valera's work is helping the entire galaxy, which is precisely why they fear her. The king's scales shifted to a dark purple, a royal color of determination. What they don't know is that I planned this from the beginning. Valera's scales flickered in surprise. What do you mean, father? Your gift appears once every few generations in our bloodline. My grandmother had it, but the nobles forced her into suppression. I watched her fade away, become an empty shell. The king's voice softened. When I saw the same gift in you, I knew I had to protect you differently. I needed someone who could teach you to embrace emotions, not fear them. So you chose Marcus, Valera said, her scales swirling with understanding. A human. The most emotional species in the galaxy. The king actually smiled. Something Marcus hadn't thought Carnaxians could do. And the most stubborn about protecting their young. Who better to guard my daughter? An explosion rocked the building, but this time it wasn't assassins. On the hologram, they could see royal guards bursting into the king's chamber. Father, Valera cried, I've already sent a royal transport for you both. Come home. Show our people there is strength in feeling. The hologram crackled as guards approached. And Valera, I am proud of you. The transmission cut off. Valera stood frozen, her scales cycling through colors so fast they became a blur. We have to go, Marcus said, already packing. Your father needs us. No. Valera's scales settled into a steel gray. I need to face this alone. This is my fight. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Marcus continued packing. I'm your guardian, remember. Legally bound by galactic law. Where you go, I go. The royal transport arrived minutes later. A sleek ship that could cross the galaxy in hours. As they boarded, Valera pulled out her violin. What's the plan? Marcus asked. The nobles fear emotion because they've never truly understood it. Her scales took on that shimmering rainbow pattern, so we'll make them understand. All of them. They arrived at the Carnaxian capital to find it in chaos. Younger Carnaxians, inspired by Valera's examples, were protesting in the streets. Their scales showed colors that hadn't been seen in public for generations. Lord Caxnor, Valera's would-be husband, waited at the palace entrance with armed guards. He was tall even for a Carnaxian, with scales so rigidly controlled they looked like metal. Princess Valera, he announced formally, come quietly, and this rebellion ends peacefully. Continue resisting, and your father faces charges of treason. Valera stepped forward, violin in hand. The guards raised their weapons. You know, she said conversationally, humans have a saying, music speaks louder than words. She began to play. Not the diplomatic harmony she used in the council, but something deeper, more primal. The true song of Carnaxian emotion, buried under centuries of suppression. Lord Caxanor's scales betrayed him first, flickering with colors he had never allowed himself to show. The guards' weapons wavered, and somewhere in the palace, High King Zixthor heard his daughter's music and smiled. The reign of emptiness was about to end. Valera's music echoed through the crystal spires of the Carnaxian capital. One by one, guards lowered their weapons as long-suppressed emotions surfaced. Lord Caxanor's scales were a chaos of colors he'd spent centuries trying to hide. But then he did something unexpected. He laughed. It started as a small sound, rusty from disuse. Then it grew, spreading through the crowd like a wave. Other Carnaxians joined in, their scales lighting up with joy they'd never allowed themselves to feel. What is happening to me? Lord Caxnor touched his face in wonder. You're feeling happiness, Marcus explained. Real happiness, not just calculated satisfaction. Valera continued playing, weaving the sound of Carnaxian laughter into her music. The effect rippled through the capital. Young Carnaxians in the streets began laughing too. Even the most hardened nobles found their scales shifting to colors of joy. High King Zixthor emerged from the palace, freed by guards who had abandoned their posts to join the celebration. His scales were shimmering with pride as he approached his daughter. The last time Chronaxians laughed freely, he announced to the crowd, was over 1,000 years ago. We thought emotions made us weak. We were wrong. The king raised all 4 arms for silence. The Galactic Council once laughed at the idea of a human raising a Chronaxian princess. Now look at what that partnership has achieved. As if on cue, diplomatic ships began arriving. The Medusans, the Patroxians, the Silicon Collective, representatives from every species, Valera had helped came to support her. Even Ambassador Orcs was attempting to laugh, though it sounded more like gears grinding. Lord Caxnor stepped forward, his scales now a humble blue. For centuries, we prided ourselves on emotional control. We called it strength. But today, I felt real strength. He turned to Valera. Princess, I withdraw my claim. You have shown us a better way. Valera lowered her violin and did something that would have been scandalous just months ago. She hugged her father. The king, after a moment of surprise, used all 4 arms to hug her back. There will be changes, the king declared. The old laws of emotional suppression are hereby abolished. And as for the human who helped make this possible, Marcus tried to look diplomatic as all eyes turned to him. Marcus Chen, you came to us as an intern. Now you stand as Earth's youngest ambassador, and the king's scales showed a mix of humor and affection. Still my daughter's guardian, if she wishes it. Valera's scales turned that special warm gold color. He's family now, even if he can't change colors or eat royal nutrition cubes without making faces. The crowd laughed again, not mockingly this time, but with genuine joy. Young Chronaxians were already showing off their color-changing scales to fascinated alien diplomats. Ambassador Orcs was recording the sound of laughter, trying to understand its components. You know what's funny? Marcus said to Valera as they watched the celebrations. This all started because they thought humans raising a Chronaxian was a joke. It was a joke, Valera replied, her scales twinkling with mischief. Just not the one they expected. Instead of laughing at us, they learned to laugh with us. She raised her violin one more time. But now she played a new song, one that mixed human joy with Chronaxian precision, creating something that belonged to neither species alone but was better for having both. As the music filled the air, Marcus watched aliens and Chronaxians dancing together, their differences forgotten in the moment. The Silicon Collective was attempting to calculate the formula for joy, while the Medusans created beautiful light patterns in their tanks to match the music. And somewhere in the Galactic Council chamber, on a plaque marking historic moments, a new entry appeared: the day the galaxy learned to laugh. Thanks to a human intern, a Chronaxian princess, and a second-hand violin. It turned out the best jokes really were the ones that brought people together.